Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Joe Hallgarton, and I'm Director of Education here at the RSA, and I'm delighted to welcome all of you here for today's event. Before we begin, could I just ask you to switch your mobile phone to silent? We're live streaming today's event as usual, so hello to everyone who's watching on the web, and a reminder that the hashtag is RSA Smarter, so if you want to get involved in any discussion on Twitter, but also there's somebody here who will collect any questions from Twitter. Is Sarah here? Yeah, Sarah will collect questions via Twitter, so if you've got questions and you're out there, please put them to Sarah. Now housekeeping notice is over. It's my great pleasure to introduce today's guest speaker, Dan Hurley. Dan is an award-winning science journalist whose 2012 feature in the New York Times Magazine, Can You Make Yourself Smarter, was one of its most read articles of the year. And you've just written something else for the New York Times in the last couple of weeks. He joins us today to share some of these astonishing insights and some more bits of mind-expanding research from his new book, Smarter. In terms of RSA education, I'm particularly interested in this in terms of a project we're doing at the moment about rethinking adolescence. So although Dan will cover the whole of the life course, I hope, I'm particularly interested in how we can think about a smarter approach to adolescence that will make adolescence smarter. Let's get straight to it. Without any further ado, please join me in welcoming Dan Hurley. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's a little ironic that the land of Newton and Darwin and Shakespeare and Dickens would invite a guy from the land of Snooki and George W. Bush to talk about intelligence. So with humility and thanks, I'll do my best. I think there is a lot of exciting new research. One thing you should know about me, I'm a real skeptic. My first science book was about dietary supplements and mostly that they don't work, which basically made all my neighbors and friends think I was, a bastard. And I am a skeptical bastard. When I was 13, I was the kind of kid that whatever you said, I'd be like, really? Really? So 3 years ago, the New York Times Magazine asked me to do a story about this researcher, Alberto Costa, he's Brazilian, was researching in the United States as a neuroscientist. His daughter was born with Down syndrome. And he changed his whole field and started researching Down syndrome, identified a drug that worked in the mouse model of Down syndrome to correct their ability to learn, and did a study in young adults. And my attitude when I first heard about it was, this can't be real. This sounds like science fiction. There was that novel Flowers for Algernon, and about a person who back then it was called mentally retarded, now people would say cognitively disabled. And he got to be a genius and then went back. And I thought, can this really be true? But the research is absolutely real. It's published in leading medical journals. And after I did that story, I found myself remembering something that I had kind of tried to put away, that when I was a young kid, when I was 8 years old, I still couldn't read. And I can remember the moment when my teacher, Mrs. Browning in Whittier School, was pointing, what's that word? And I looked at it and I said, to-he? And she said, no, that's the. And that was the moment that I learned to read the word the. And I can remember where I was sitting and where she was. And it's very peculiar. And 3 years later, I was a straight-A student and something of a teacher's pet. And, my writing teacher would say, do whatever you want. I can't tell you what to do. And I always wondered what happened there. And I know that for me, I had started reading Spider-Man comics. And I don't know if you saw, I had an article in The Guardian a couple weeks ago about this. And yeah, my best friend had gotten really obsessed with comic books, and he and another guy started reading them all the time. And I was like, I'm going to read them too. And, maybe Spider-Man changed my brain. Did Spider-Man make me smarter? But I was interested, and I decided to start looking into this research in people without Down syndrome. And one thing that I've known is that this notion that intelligence can't change, although psychologists have really believed that for about 100 years, basically it's accepted dogma in science. That view has also been responsible for a lot of really evil acts. The whole eugenics movement was really based in part on this idea that, these mentally deficient people need to be pruned from the family, the human family tree. And in the United States, tens of thousands of people were sterilized against their will, cognitively disabled people. And of course, then that view went back across the Atlantic in the 1930s and turned into the Nazi extermination of many cognitively disabled people who, there are books describing, children being taken away supposedly to help them in a hospital and the parents never seeing them again. Because of this ugly view of that you can't do anything about your intelligence, I think a lot of popular writers have turned their backs on the notion that intelligence matters. So if this thing is so bad, let's just walk away from it. And so you get books like Emotional Intelligence, which say quite rightly that your ability to deal with your emotions and understand and read other people's emotions and respond appropriately, very important. Absolutely. Malcolm Gladwell in Outliers has made this so-called rule of 10,000 hours of work, that if you just do 10,000 hours of practice in your chosen field, you'll be a master of it, which, hard work is a good thing. And Edison said genius is 99% perspiration, and that's of course true. Paul Tough now, book came out last year in the United States, I'm not sure if you guys have it here yet, How Children Succeed, and that's all about grit and determination. So we all know, I know in my life, you can't make it as a freelance writer if you're not a fiercely determined person who doesn't quit when the going gets tough. And so those are all really important, but what they're kind of saying is that all that matters is be nice, work hard, don't give up, and it'll all work out. And that is not my experience in life. I know that I am a very hard worker, but I also know any professional journalist or writer meets people that want to write a book, and they say they're writing and they're trying, but they're not getting there. And the idea that just because the Beatles practiced hard, why didn't all those other bands that practiced hard make it? They had something special going on. So intelligence does matter. It actually affects people that are more intelligent live longer, which when you hear about these conductors who, being a conductor is one of the most cognitively challenging things to do in the world. They always seem, when they die, to be like 99 years old. And it's actually been shown to be the case. So, and intelligence is not just, it's got this bad name as if it's just being able to solve a puzzle and do rocket science. But in the real world, it's really how we get through life, and how we're able to, yes, being emotionally sensitive is important, but actually people that have more cognitive reserve are better able to control their emotions, which is why when you hear these reports of criminals who did something incredibly stupid and they got caught, and why are all those people in jail? It's because, yeah, it's not just that they're emotionally disturbed, they're cognitively challenged, a lot of these people. So it really matters at every level of life, just in terms of, even in the work world, there aren't as many factories. The mills are all closed. They're all in India and Bangladesh now, and soon they'll be in Africa, and then those people will go through what we're dealing with, which is having to be a cognitive worker and work with your head. So it's important for our economy and just life. So given the importance, and that you can't just dismiss it, it's really good that about 6 years ago, this field of intelligence research was basically saved from the bastards who keep saying you can't do anything. And a new study came out. This was by Susan Yaki and Martin Buchkold. They were originally from Switzerland. And they found that doing about 20 minutes a day, 5 days a week for 4 weeks of working memory tasks, and I'll tell you what that is, raised their fluid intelligence by 40% in 19 days, which is crazy. And in fact, studies since then have found not that giant a gain. But this was considered a heresy when it came out. I think you could make comparisons to any scientific revolutions. A lot of the conservatives say, no, how dare you make such a claim. Let me just explain. Working memory is this really important thing that psychologists have zoomed in on in the past 15 years. We all know long-term memory is remembering your childhood phone number. Short-term memory is if I say 7940281, most of you can kind of remember it. Working memory is your ability to manipulate these numbers, these words, these ideas, to move them around like cards on a table and turn them over so you don't see it, and then bring it back and remember it. Working memory is what is very closely related to intelligence. Short-term memory is not. Long-term memory is not very strongly related. So we all know the absent-minded professor who can't remember where anything is, and yet he's some genius solving all sorts of problems. And even as we get older, the loss of some ability to remember things from long ago starts happening, but it's the working memory that is really important. Working memory is the reason why you probably don't remember the number that I said earlier now. Does anyone? Nice. Good job. This task for working memory that Susan Yaki and Martin Buchkold developed, it was originally just a test of your fluid intelligence. It's called the NBAC, and basically it's asking you to remember what was that item that I mentioned N times ago, like X times ago. So if I'm reading a list of letters, and I say, tell me, press this button every time I repeat it from one time ago. So if I say N-L-L, bonk, yeah, you just repeated L. But if you do it two back, right? So that means, I'll give you a thing and see if you can remember. It's pretty easy, two back. N-A-Q-L-Q-A-L-N-L-N. Pretty easy. Three back is where you start going crazy. let me give this to you. See if you can remember it. I'll raise my hand when I repeat 3 back. L, Q, N, Q, A, N, L, A, Q, A, L, Q. Starts blowing your mind a bit, especially when you see it on a computer. These are, most people when they see this, they just like back away and they don't want to do it because it seems like an impossible task. But it's not impossible. And the big deal is that you get better at it as you practice. Everybody finds that they get better. So I decided I was going to look into this and that I would meet with researchers. I attend, excuse me, I have a cough. I've been traveling and let's see here. Did you ever have a glass of water with a couple hundred people watching you? Okay. I want to say there are a lot of skeptics, and if you look into this field online, if you read news accounts, it's easy to find reports of it's all bogus. The New Yorker, the most prominent magazine in the United States, had a blog item last year that said, brain training is bogus. And it was based on the report of a handful of researchers who've published studies that did not find this kind of effect. What I did was I looked through and spoke to everybody and read all the studies, and given that it's just 6 years old, a lot of the researchers have their own points of view and they're not maybe all aware of what everybody's doing. So I had this kind of unique opportunity as a journalist to kind of come in to this kind of chaotic field and try to make of it what I could, sort of like a war reporter where things are so confusing that generals are reading the New York Times to find, or the Times of London to find out what is going on and get reports that their own lieutenants are not telling them. And what I found was, first of all the funding agencies are moving forward, are continuing to fund it. Most people in the field keep finding positive effects. And I found 75 published, randomized, peer-reviewed trials where they found significant benefits to various forms of cognitive training. And I only found 4 that found no benefit. So my view was, this stuff, there's something there. There's definitely something there. It can't be nonsense. To test it on myself, I didn't want to just write a book and tell about all these studies. I felt like before I write a book saying you can make yourself smarter, I want to test that for real. So I did 7 things. I did the NBAC online. There's a site called soakyourhead.com where it's free. I joined an exercise boot camp because exercise has been shown to be really helpful. And I happen to have a next-door neighbor who's an exercise fanatic, and I joined it and did it for 3.5 months. I did music training. I learned to play the lute, the Renaissance lute. Back in 1978, my senior year of college, I spent a semester here in London, and a friend's uncle, played the lute. And I saw him one day and I said, gee, when I get old and bald, I'm going to learn to play the lute. And this was my opportunity. It's actually very hard to find a lute. There are not a lot of them. They're very expensive. And I found one that was not that expensive. I found a teacher. Music training, there's a good number of studies showing a benefit. Mindfulness meditation, I tried that. There's, again, studies showing it's a benefit. I gave up after 2 weeks. I had too much going on. I did one of the commercial services, Lumosity. There's pretty decent evidence that a lot of what they offer, even though it seems like fun and games, and even though it's offered as a commercial service, so in the United States, you know, on radio and TV, you hear, make your brain brighter. And it sounds, I think, to anyone skeptical, like nonsense. But it turns out they're really serious about what they're trying to do. And it's not very expensive. There's another one called CogMed, which is more aimed at kids with like ADHD or people trying to recover from chemotherapy. If you've ever heard of chemo brain, that's a very real thing. And they're doing a lot of great work. If you've got a family member that you're concerned about, I think CogMed is something to look into. The sixth thing I did was I got my brain zapped with electricity. So there's something called transcranial direct current stimulation. And there's researchers in Britain and all around the world. Roy Kadash Cohen is here in Britain, who does a lot of great research. And there are so many studies of this. It can improve everything from literally that thinking outside the box is actually a psychological test where they show you these dots and you're supposed to try to figure out how to connect them all with just the fewest lines. And it requires you to solve it to go outside the box and of the lines. So people do that much better if they're getting this transcranial direct current. It's only 9 volts of electricity. It's very low dose. It's not, there's no bolts of electricity. There's no Frankenstein monster going, you can't even feel it. But there's a lot of studies showing an effect. Last thing I did was I took a nicotine patch, which hopefully the public health authorities won't be coming to drag me off the stage for saying it, but there's a lot of studies, basic research into nicotine. Parkinson's patients are sometimes being given nicotine to help them with their movement disorder. People that are smokers, who were smokers, have half the risk of developing Parkinson's. So there's nicotinic receptors in your brain, and they actually, it's like a fundamental part of your wiring. And apparently, I took the 7 milligram dose. I didn't feel it. I never felt jazzed. I didn't feel more wide awake, but on days when I was using it, I did find by the end of the day that I had worked more efficiently. So from all those things, when I got done, I took this Raven's Advanced Matrices, Progressive Matrices, which is this test of fluid intelligence. And compared to when I started, afterward, I was 16% better. So I don't know what that means. It's a number on a test. I felt I wrote a better book. I got along better with my family. My now 18-year-old daughter was dealing with a lot of medical problems. She actually developed anorexia, and it's a very hard illness to deal with. And I just felt I negotiated that problem, like really helped figure out how to get her treated. So all of these have in common that the thing has to be hard. So if you're just doing your crossword puzzles that you've been doing for 20 years, that's good. But if you want to get better, you've got to do something that is new and novel and is difficult. It's got to be progressive. So you've got to be, as you get better, it's got to get harder. That's why taking chess instructions can be good. Music instructions can be good. All of these working memory games on the computer get harder as you get better, like the NBAC. I got up to 5 back, by the way. This sounds like pixie dust. Believing makes it happen. It sounds like a Walt Disney movie. But in a very real way, they've even done randomized trials where if you tell a kid that you can make yourself smarter through hard work, they will do better on tests that you give them than kids that you told intelligence is fixed. So and also, obviously, if you believe you can do better, all these evil things that have happened in the past, you're not going to do them because you're going to say, well, it's like a medical illness, and let's help you get better. And I also found it really felt inspiring and good, and I just felt more alive doing all these things instead of sitting down at 9 o'clock and watching a television show. I was, I gotta do the loot now. And I felt like, gee, that's what smart people do, isn't it? They sit there at night and they're playing the loot, and then they play a game of chess, and they're always doing something. For me also, I have a 6-year-old foster child whose mom didn't send her to school when she should have gone, didn't read to her, and she's having problems. We're enrolling her in CogMed. We're getting her football lessons. We're going to have her sit down with a piano teacher who teaches children. And I truly believe that you really can make a difference, that we're at the beginning of a new field, and there certainly remains a lot left to be learned. But the notion that we're stuck, I think, is behind us, and there's a lot of excitement to see, how can you help children and adults blossom and grow. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Dan. If you'd like to sit down here. I'm just checking to see if we have a lute in the building. If we do,
Is
I'm hoping
there a
you'll
lute?
play. Well, let's see.
You will
play it if it's
actually...
there. Thanks. A few questions from me, if you,
Yes.
to start. I really have enjoyed your attempt to, in a way, reclaim intelligence and to reclaim the notion of intelligence, not just from those who want to reject it, but also from those who try to expand its definition to a point where it becomes a little bit nebulous. The notion of multiple intelligences, I think, could be an example of this. But I just wanted to, as a starting point, to get your clear definition of what you think intelligence means in your context.
Oh, I think I'm clearly focused on fluid intelligence. And this is seeing patterns, making sense of things, seeing the forest through the trees. And I think, when we hear that before 9/11, there were all these intelligence officers all looking at all this data, and meanwhile there are guys getting piloting lessons who don't want to learn how to land, and you go, and that the government was unable to hear that makes you think, well, at some level the government was being stupid, and it'd be great to see organizations value, like, what is actually real information here. So it's, and we're in a time with Google and big data where we're overwhelmed with information. So information is great, and there are more scientists working today and more studies getting published, but it's really, what is knowledge, what is useful, and how can we see through it? And that is, I think, is the challenge of our time, is not being overwhelmed by everything that's floating around out there. So, psychologists measure it with the ravens and all these very specific measurements, but I think in real life it's pretty clear your ability to learn and grow and understand things.
Right. I like the phrase cognitive reserve, actually. That's the one that felt like a very useful definition.
Absolutely.
Within this. You talked about Spider-Man, and you also talked about your lute playing, and I did notice when you talked about the lute playing in particular, your body language changed very, very, very radically when you talked about that. And I just wondered, for me it struck a chord around the emotional connections here. So clearly Spider-Man struck some type of emotional chord with you that helped you to read. And similarly, compared to all the other experiences you've gone through in the last year or so, there must have been something about the emotional connection you had with lute playing.
Well,
and I wondered if there was any research or anything else around kind of emotional connections and how that builds smartness.
Well, one of the biggest problems is that none of this tells us how to get people to do these things. So these things are hard, right? And the biggest problem any teacher will have, you've talked about adolescence, when you have that 14-year-old kid sitting in the back with his head looking at the ceiling and he's half asleep and he's just waiting to get out of there, you've got a real problem because you can't get him to engage. The problem here, this research makes you smarter. That's the next book, How to Get More Motivated. Certainly for me, doing working memory training is not, there's no innate satisfaction in that, right? Unless you're just sort of competitive and competing against yourself. So that's kind of fun. But learning to play the lute, I love music, and it was just a beautiful experience. That was certainly my favorite thing that I still, I'm still very excited about. I'm trying to learn this Bach piece that is just gorgeous, and every time I hear it, I go crazy. So I think you've got to find something. There's so many ways, there's so many roads to do these things. You don't have to try all 7 that I did, and there are others out there. You can pick one that you like, but there's definitely a need for research on how to get people to go to the gym when they're supposed to and everything else that they're supposed to do.
Finally, the other thing I liked about your book, that it was yet another nail in the coffin of eugenics.
Yes.
But at the same time, there is an emerging research into epigenetics, which is around how your genes and DNA can be somehow changed by your environment.
Absolutely.
And I don't know enough about this field, but I just wonder if that has something to add to issues around smartness and how you can make yourself smarter.
I happen to have written an article last year about behavioral epigenetics, and it's pretty interesting that the experiences of your grandparents their experiences in life will affect not the genes, because your genes don't change, but the activity of these things that attach to the genes and allow them to do their work more or less. Every cell in your body has the same genes, so why are they all doing different things? It's because the scaffolding, the epigenetics, are allowing different proteins to be made. So I think there's no question that especially even when you say, a lot of research will say, well, look at the genetics research when we do families and we do twin studies, and clearly there's a genetic effect. But the epigenetics can last for generations and could be controlling that. So and I have no doubt that families that have valued education and reading and playing chess, like my friend who got me into reading Spider-Man, they had a Modigliani painting on the wall, and they were always listening to classical music, and they had a marble chessboard on their living room table. And that's just the world they lived in, and I'm sure that went for generations. And I believe that they're going to find that these things, your interest in these things, has an epigenetic basis. And these things can be modified through your own behavior. You can change those things and pass on to your own children a better working blueprint for them to go forward in life.
So it's more ammunition for the argument for fluid intelligence, if you like.
I think so.
Fantastic.
I think so.
Great. We'll take some questions from the floor first, and then in about 5 minutes we'll take questions from Twitter. So please get your questions in the next 5 minutes, please. If when you ask a question you can say your name and keep your questions or comments really quite brief, then we'll have time for lots. We'll take the gentleman at the front and the person in the middle and the person at the back as well. We'll take this side first. Thank you.
I'm Paul Tobias. After having all the enhancement that you experienced, did it actually increase your intelligence or allow you to make more use of a finite intelligence that was already there? And does it matter?
That's an excellent question. I understand what you're saying. I think that's a distinction without a difference a bit. It's kind of an unknowable. That's almost like saying, my daughter and I used to joke, she would say, well, what if there is a giant invisible monster in the room, but you can't see it, but it's really there? And I'm like, yeah, what if? So if, I think in the real world, what we want to know is we want to be able to do better, right? So you want to be able to maybe get that job that you're trying to get. If a student is trying to pass a big test to get accepted to something, if you're an older person is having difficulty driving, that's actually it's a cognitive activity, right? So how come they no longer are seeing things on the side of the road as much? How come they're not anticipating things? Those are actually working memory deficits, which is also the reason why talking on your cell phone is distracting, because you have a limit to how much you can pay attention to at once. So if you're just improving the thing that's already there, or just revealing what's already there, or if you're actually exceeding what you previously ever could have achieved, I don't know. And I don't care, but it would be great. It would, and researchers need to find that stuff out, because a lot of them say that, are you simply bringing yourself to your best possible self? We all know that weightlifters, 100 people could do the same weightlifting exercises, and some will really bulk up and others will less so. I certainly would less so. But if we're all getting better, I have no problem with that. That's a good thing. That's a good problem to have.
Thanks. Question over there.
Christina, thank you so much for your talk. I was very heartened by your crack at phonics at the beginning with the t-he, which is
Yes.
quite useful. And the Spider-Man, because last night I was talking to a woman journalist who grew up on Enid Blyton, very bad stuff. So it's fascinating to me what you're saying about how reading was the thing that got you going. But I actually think probably you've just made me realise that conducting is probably the highest form of intelligence. They live longer, music hits the dementia area, and why we are not teaching very young children, 3 possibly before, putting them in a rich environment, because Professor Greenfield's work on neuroscience has shown that if you bring up mice in a rich environment, the Modigliani, Parkinson's hits later. So while I love what you're saying about reading, please bring back the music for young children.
And there's a program here in London called the Bridge Project. Has anyone heard of it? It's by this group called Music Masters, and they're providing music education to kids in impoverished neighborhoods. No, this is a new. It's yes, and you speak about mice. People have done this exact working memory training in mice. It sounds impossible. They take 2 radial mazes and make them learn to. They have to remember which ones they've gone to get the food pellet. They have them do 2 at once, and they keep moving them back and forth. So they have to keep track of 2 of them at once. And around the room are little things that they've painted on the walls and posters they've put up, so the rat or mouse can kind of go, oh yeah, I'm over here in this maze, and yeah, so I've already done that one, and I can go here, and then when they go back to the other one, they can keep track. They learn it just like we can learn the end back. And then when they take the mice that have learned to do that better, they put them in, give them cognitive tests, like a variety of challenges, and they do better at those. It's really crazy. So mice, you can make smarter mice.
And a question at the back.
I run an organisation called Potential Plus UK, which works with very high ability students. And we've been working with Tracy Alloway, who's one of the working memory gurus,
Yes.
to look at the impact on high ability students of the things that you've been talking about. What we've been finding are, in some cases, very high ability students, IQs of 165, 130, who parents are bringing to us because they're underachieving, very poor working memory. I just wonder, if that's the case across the whole country, what do you think the impact is of the structure of how education's run?
Well, I think that we are in very early days, okay, of this research into working memory and fluid intelligence. It's interesting that you would say that they had a high IQ, but their working memory was limited, because a lot of early research began coalescing around the idea that there are almost two ways to measure the same thing in a way. They're very closely related usually. So usually a high IQ person has a really good working memory. But if you don't have a good working memory, increasing it is really, really, really useful. And even if it doesn't make you have a higher fluid intelligence, if you just have a better working memory, that is a powerful cognitive ability, and it's going to allow you to function much better. So if as these trials, I think they've got to start getting up to studies of hundreds and hundreds of people and have them really, really well done, and just leave destroy the final skeptics or answer their doubts. And then I think we'll see schools offering this, because rather than just trying to get kids to learn, this stuff helps them learn how to learn.
We're assessing about 4 children a week,
That's great.
and we've got a lot of evidence on that, so
I'd be interested to hear about that, because there's been some suggestions that the higher levels you are, the less likely you are to benefit from this training, because it's as if you're trying to get the last few feet to climb Mount Everest, and it just gets harder and harder to go further up. But if they have working memory deficits, doing training is going to be a big deal for them.
Thanks. We'll have questions from here in a moment, but before that, 2 questions from Twitter via Sarah.
Yes, hi there. The first one is, some of your definitions of fluid intelligence sounds like intuition. What or where is the overlap?
Well, intuition, excuse me, is definitely different. So there's, that book Blink, and the books Thinking Fast and Slow. So there is some level at which your immediate reactions do have to do with your fluid intelligence. So for instance, tests of kids' ability to make estimates on, like if I throw down a series of coins on the floor and I say, how many is that? Kids that are better at that, making that guess, seem to will have better math skills in general. There's a definite correlation between this sort of gut level intuition about things and your very thoughtful thinking through it. But it's not intuition. In fact, most of these things have to do with very systematically thinking through possibilities. So, and we've all heard of scientists who will puzzle and puzzle and puzzle over something. And it's like doing these Raven's matrices are this row of like 3 items and 3 items and 3 items. And the triangle is little, the triangle is bigger, it's biggest. The square is little, it's bigger, it's biggest. The circle is little, it's bigger. Oh, what should the last one be? Well, it should be a big circle. But as those get harder, it starts turning into like trying to decode a language, a lost language, and what does this writing mean? And you've got to be very, very, very systematic. And thinking that kind of way is draining, it's taxing, it requires, it's like being a Fred Astaire in your mind of just really knowing exactly where to file everything. And smart people are really good at that. You can often see them almost. Like if you ask a history professor, what was that thing about that battle in 1841? And their mind just kind of goes, and you can see them going through the files and getting down to that bottom file and opening up the folder and finding the correct page. And that ability is really important, and it's not just intuition.
And
one more.
yeah, the other one was, what, if anything, makes us less intelligent?
Doing nothing. So, my 6-year-old foster daughter, who we hope we might be able to adopt, she didn't go to school. She watched a lot of TV. She didn't have a lot of socializing with other children. They sat around in that apartment and had the TV on, and they yelled at each other, and that was her little world. We know there's this phenomenon called dumber over the summer, where kids in the spring, they'll test higher than they do in the fall because over the summer they've been, well, it's good that they're running around, hopefully, but these days they might have spent the summer watching TV and being on their phone and playing war games, which some of those things like the war games can have some benefits. But generally speaking, if you're not thinking. So stimulation, as the other questioner asked, cognitive stimulation, definitely, we know this in animals, we know this in brain studies, that the more enriched your environment, the better you're going to do. And I think all this research is saying is it's not enough to just have your routine of, yes, I like to do the crossword puzzle, that if you ramp up the level of stimulation and that you're pushing your brain, you can move it even further.
Although excessive stimulation might make you less smart, and also periods of reflection, active reflection, can also possibly increase your smartness in various ways.
Well, I wrote for the New York Times Magazine a piece about mindfulness meditation, and there's some people that say that being too mindful might make you less creative, that some of the great ideas that come to scientists and writers just wander into their mind, and that those kids that are staring off into the distance while their teacher is trying to tell them something, maybe they're going to solve the next great problem. It's a balance, though. That's what they all say. It's a balance between when you need to be mindful, when you're taking a test, when you're writing a book and you have a deadline, and you sure better sit down and words better be appearing on that computer screen or you're in trouble. And there are other times when you want to sit and just ponder and forget about what you're trying to concentrate on.
Thanks. Let's take some questions here. Thanks for being so patient. We'll take one here, and the gentleman there and the woman there. We'll try and get to you afterwards. If we take all three at the same time, and then if you could respond to all three, if that's possible.
Yes.
Good test of working
Be
memory.
like a chess player.
My name's David. Several things have come up from what you've been saying, but one which I'm interested in thinking about, if it falls into your idea of working memory, is I know lots of people like myself who will do a crossword, get through a bit of it, can't go anywhere, and then maybe the following morning they'll pick it up and they'll almost be able to complete it. Is this working memory running in a subconscious routine?
The brain does not stop at night. So I know I routinely, in fact, I started noticing like 10 years ago that when I wake up is when a lot of fresh thoughts come to me, and I'll often just lie there and allow. And it's interesting how your brain your brain is like a meaning machine, right? It's not just a computer. It's really looking for what's important. And it's fascinating, just allow things, and when things start coming into my mind, I go, oh, right, that is something I've got to deal with. So it's long been noticed that people will solve a problem. People learn better. They've done things with learning a task, and if you go to sleep and wake up, you will then be better at it than someone who learned it, say, in the morning and then tried it again late in the afternoon. So a lot of things are going on there at night. A lot of housekeeping is going on, and not surprisingly, it's easier for your brain to work when the banana peels have been removed from the floor. So.
Thank you. Question here.
Patrick McIntosh, can you talk a bit more about diet and what effect that has? And also, can you tell me where I can go and plug my brain in?
There are really cool studies where they're doing neural implants, okay? They're doing this in mice, and they can get them to remember things with little computer chips that jump over a barrier that they have cut away so that they can't do it normally. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think the Matrix is going to happen anytime soon. It's just, listen, we're not going to walk around with brain implants. It's not happening anytime soon. It's a science fiction movie. Of course, in 200 years, someone can look at this video and they'll all be laughing as they're sitting there plugged in. But diet, my first science book was about the crazy world of dietary supplements and fascination with trying to find everything's going to be solved by whole foods. It's a lovely idea. I'm a vegetarian, okay? I'm also a type 1 diabetic. So I'm very aware of food and the need to watch it. But there's not very good research. There's really a lack of great studies showing that there's really no particular food that makes you smarter. Even fish oil. So there was just a study published about a week ago saying that older people that take fish oil, that their brains are doing better a few years later. But in infants and pregnant women, if you give them fish oil, a number of studies have come out saying this actually has a slight, if anything, harmful effect, which is shocking. So I would be really careful. And I'm the guy that just told you about a nicotine patch, so I'm sorry. But nature doesn't really care what our beliefs are and that things are good or bad. So diet, I do know, I'll tell you, I haven't had lunch, and I know that when I eat less, I am definitely more on, and the more I have a big lunch, I want to go to sleep, and that's a confirmed thing. And anyone who is really seriously overweight and dealing with sleep apnea and type 2 diabetes, these are all not good for your brain. So someone who is thin on average is going to not just live longer, but that their brain is going to be doing better.
Thanks. The person just behind you, just wait for the microphone if you can. Thank you.
Sandra, thank you very much. I was actually going to ask about diet, but there's one more thing, and that's caffeine. Can you make a comment about caffeine, please? Getting the balance right. Well, yeah, but...
I didn't spend a lot of time on caffeine just because I felt like we all know it wakes you up. We all know it's kind of stimulating. I drink endless amounts of coffee. I'm, a hopeless addict. But there was a study published just a couple weeks ago that said that caffeine actually increases your memory so if you learn something today, the next day when they test people, the ones who got the caffeine remembered better, and that's surprising. But most other drugs are not, we all are looking for a smart pill. It'd be nice, but most of them fail. The stimulants that people still give to this day to people in the military, they really can be harmful, and they can make people paranoid. And so when they give soldiers, back in the 50s, when they were giving soldiers, oh, let's give them amphetamines. Well, what they end up doing is when the guy who just went to the bathroom in the bushes comes back, they shoot him because they're like all over everything. And that's not very helpful. Even Provigil, which a lot of college university students are taking off, without a prescription, and amphetamine, anything, Ritalin to help. These wake you up, they make you alert, and they make you can get through the night and cram your studies in, but they don't seem to really have anything beyond that. So weirdly, the nicotine, because we have nicotinic receptors in our brain, does seem to have some actually affects your performance, and you actually do better even if you're already wide awake. So they're going to be working a long time on looking for a smart pill. Side effects is the big problem, because if you're just trying to make yourself a little better, you don't want to have a heart attack for that. And yeah.
Okay, just one more question there, and possibly one there. We'll see if we'll have time. Sorry.
Thank you, Vipin. Thank you for a fascinating talk. I was just wondering, is your distinction between the 10,000-hour rule and grit, determination, etc., and what you're talking about, perhaps a bit more subtle than maybe you're referring to? And the example I'll give, you talked about the Beatles. For those who don't know, they're in Germany for 400 consecutive nights, apparently, back in the 60s, honing their craft, refining what they were doing, coming back consecutively one day after the other. The upshot of that is, by the end of that process, they were a very tight group. You also referred to the music part of what you've been experimenting with, and that through your application and dedication towards that, similarly, you've been experiencing lots of good positive vibes, and you become a better lute player as well. So I'm just trying to understand in my own mind, what's the distinction?
So hard work, nothing beats hard work, right? You can make up for a lot with working hard. And that's why, you'll find a lot of super successful people are often sort of OCD, because they're just so thorough that they're too thorough. But they benefit from that disability. The problem with it is that the research just doesn't hold up. That yes, so hard work is necessary, but it's not sufficient. And I would say intelligence is necessary, but it's not sufficient. So the world is a complicated place, and you need a lot of things. If you're an emotional wreck, you might be able to do well on your rugby team, and you might be able to succeed in business, even though you're yelling at everybody. If you're the top performer, they might put up with it. But generally speaking, you're going to get fired, and it's not going to be a good thing. So I'm not trying to claim. A lot of book writers will, Malcolm Gladwell, in trying to make the case that hard work and your background make a big difference, and family support, he put a lot of effort into then destroying the importance of intelligence. And you're just not, it doesn't work. It's studies of chess grandmasters, for instance, have shown that there are the 10,000-hour things. No, there are people that did it in 6,000 hours or 7,000 hours. And there are people that have done 15,000 hours who can't make it. So, and we all know that. We all know that there are people that are just naturally gifted. And to go to that kind of effort to prove that talent doesn't matter, it's not everything, but it's something. Ability is something. It's a part of the equation. And that's all I'm trying to say.
Thanks. We need to wrap up now, I'm afraid. It strikes me that we still don't quite know what makes us smarter, but it feels that the act of trying to become smarter does tend to make us happier. So let's all keep trying.
Great.
I would like to, before we thank Dan, I'd just like to say you're going to have lunch and a sleep, but before that you're available to sign books outside. It's the day of the launch in the UK, so please step outside and talk to Dan further. Any other questions? But on behalf of everybody and everybody at the RSA, I'd like to thank Dan Hurley for your speech.
Thank you.